Hi, this is Randal Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Jonathan Bennett joins me. We're going to be talking about OpenSMTPD, the SMTPD that works for the OpenBSD project. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Jonathan Bennett. Episode 543, recorded August 21st, 2019. OpenSMTPD. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Hover. Make a name for yourself with Hover. Visit hover.com/twit to get 10% off your first purchase of any domain extension for the entire first year. And by Command Line Heroes, the original podcast from Red Hat. It's back for its third season, and this time it's about the epic history of programming languages. Episode 5 investigates COBOL and Go, the languages that built the foundations of our IT infrastructure, old and new. Go to redhat.com/heroes or listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz. Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, little projects, projects you may be using every day and not aware of it, like maybe today, actually. Projects you may want to download right after the show and play with. I'm not sure this will be one of those. Joining me once again is my lovely and talented co-host, Jonathan Bennett. Jonathan, welcome back.
Hey, Randall, it's good to be here once again. I was looking, I kind of try to pay attention so that I don't wear the same clothes every week in a row. And
Sure.
Apparently this is my fourth week in a row to co-host, which was a little surprising to me. So I'm back.
Well, I totally appreciate that you're flexible enough that you can actually be the co-host many times. I mean, I have a flexible schedule because I'm a contractor, and ZipRecruiter is happy to allow me to provide the time to do this every Wednesday morning when I want to. But you're like on your own schedule, right?
Yes. Yeah, I'm technically a contractor as well. I run my own business. So I get to set the schedule as well.
Right. So I am speaking to you, for those of you who don't recognize this background, really blank wall and a slight edge of a closet, which is the other side of me on the right side there. I am in my new digs. So I have been moved from the place I had been for the last 3 years to a new place, which is about 4 miles south of where I was before. So I'm having to identify all the new sort of roads to go down and around and join into. And that's because my old digs, my friend of 30 years, Rusty, needed a place for his brother, who unfortunately has been afflicted with terminal cancer. So that sort of sucks. And so he needed a place for them to go. And I just got beeps from my laptop. There we go. Stop that laptop. And the new place is actually kind of nice. It's in a little quieter neighborhood. And I have my own bathroom, which unfortunately before I didn't really. I shared a bathroom with a couple of other people, so it's actually kind of nice. So there's still a few things I haven't found from the move, but I have 11 plastic tubs over there in the corner, which are basically everything I own in the world, which is nice. So I'm happy. I'm actually reasonably happy. There's a place for me to park out front, except that they're paving the road this week and next. So I'm having to park and a half away, but that's okay. And I think my audio is probably cutting out based on the video that I'm seeing here. So I'll just keep talking and listening. Today we have Gilles Chehade, who is going to be talking to us about OpenSMTPD. Now, everybody listening to this audience, or everybody listening to the audience, I don't know what they're doing, but everybody in the audience, how do they listen to the audience? That'd be pretty bad. Everybody in the audience has sent and received email. And in fact, I was just joking earlier in the chat room about how in the IT crowd, they talk about sending emails, receiving emails, deleting emails, and so on. So SMTP is the, I believe, I should have looked this up, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. It is one of the oldest things that the internet set up, the ability to transfer email from one place to another. And so everybody who has a Unix machine, and Windows machines, actually, I think too, I guess, yeah, right, Windows and Linux and all those guys, they have something listening on port 25 that it's basically taking all the email in and delivering it or relaying it to the next place. And that's the SMTP daemon, SMTPD. OpenBSD invented their own SMTPD a while back. And we're going to be talking with Gilles about how that happened and why that happened. Machine PostFix, which I'm having a perfectly fine time with, working really well. And so I wonder why there's a different daemon for OpenBSD. And I ran OpenBSD for a while. I ran it for just long enough to know that I wanted to move to FreeBSD. I think that's kind of the strategy there. FreeBSD was an advantage because it also ran ZFS and had a much bigger ports package and could also run Linux binaries without too much work, things like that. So what do you know about OpenSMTPD, Mr. Jonathan?
You actually gave us a pretty good recap of where it sits in the space. Doing a little bit of looking, it looks like one of the things that they were kind of trying to get right was the security aspect of it. In fact, they have some kind of interesting looking things. There was a pledge command that they seem to be using, which kind of reminded me of asserts. I'm not sure if it does the exact same thing. That's what it appeared to be. So, there's been some SMTP daemons in the news recently that have had security bugs. And I'm guessing, especially with the way the BSDs look at the world and their security, I'm guessing what they did is they looked at what was out there and said, none of these are, written well enough or secure enough. Let's build our own and do it right from the ground up.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's a complex piece of software because it has to accept a huge litany of things to say, okay, I want to have these encoding types. I want to have this ability to relay to a different place. And I want to deliver locally in various ways. It's a very complex piece of software. And to get it right requires a lot of thinking. So obviously we'll be talking to Gilles about how that all works out. But before we do that, I do have a very important message. Because this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Hover. Hover is a jumping off point for many entrepreneurs, and they want you to start your business with a domain name. Hover has over 300 domain name extensions to choose from when building your brand online. No matter what you want to build, there's a domain name waiting for it. You'll find excellent technical support available to answer any questions you may have. Their support team doesn't upsell you. They only work hard to help you get online. Hover has free WHOIS privacy protection, a clean and easy to navigate UX UI, monthly sales on popular top-level domains. It's not hard to see why Hover is a popular choice for people starting at all kinds of businesses. Keeping your domain name separate from hosting gives you the flexibility to choose the right platform for your business. No one wants to be stuck with a solution that doesn't meet their needs. Just buy your domain name and connect to the platform of your choice. That's easy. I personally have used Hover since they became an advertiser on FLOSS Weekly many, many years ago. I have probably 15 domains with them, so I'm very happy with their service. Make a name for yourself with Hover. Visit hover.com/twit to get 10% off your first purchase of any domain extension for the entire first year. That's hover.com/TWIT for 10% off your domain extension for a full year. And we thank Hover for their support of FLOSS Weekly. And now let's go ahead and bring on our guest today. That would be Gilles Chehade. Is that close?
Almost.
Okay. Why don't you pronounce it once, so that we can use it from there.
Gilles Chehade.
Okay, Chehade. All right. Well, there we go. Okay, I really butchered that. Sorry.
You can call me Gilles.
All right. Very good. So tell us a little bit about SMTP. Very important to the internet. I mean, it's email, right? And OpenSMTPD. Why does it exist? There's already a bunch of other implementations, right?
Yeah, so the project was started more than 10 years ago. And back then, there was no acceptable SMTP server to be included in OpenBSD, mostly due to licensing. And there was only SendMail that could be included, which was why it remained the default SMTP server for many years. But it was not on par with security. And there was a DGB's QML, and there was postfix, but they both had licenses that did not allow including in OpenBSD. So we had to take a decision to either remain with SendMail, despite the fact that it was complex and not really in the OpenBSD philosophy, or write a new one. And
I remember SendMail. I remember SendMail. The configuration for it was M4, right? You had to figure out these bizarre M4 files to be able to build anything, right?
Yeah, it was very complex, and this is why there was that famous book that was like huge, like this, just to configure SendMail. And it was easy to get things wrong. So even if you were like experienced, and you would have to do something that you're not used to do with a new configuration, you had to go into lots of testing, more than you should have. And it was really what happened to me, because I used to run SendMail, and I was asked to do something, and it was like really challenging to me. I made it, but I was not sure. I did not break something else, and I was not sure if the configuration was right. And it occurred to me that it was way too complex. And for something that's supposed to be the simple mail transfer protocol, it's way too complex.
Well, and I remember I added dot addressing to SendMail, and it actually became part of the core. But it was like, you had to understand like all the different states that you could be in and how to migrate from one state to the other. And again, the fact that there was this indirection of M4 macros in the middle of that, you had to, I don't remember how many times I typed DNL and SendMail configuration files. It was like, okay, I don't even know what that stands for anymore, but it was something about get rid of the new line or something like that.
Yeah, and you had the ability to implement a protocol using the macros, so it was way beyond the simplicity we needed. And this showed because in France, some university was distributing a kit, what's known to be a kit, to ease configuration for the daemon. And when you have to have projects to ease configuration, it becomes, it means it's complex.
Yeah, so how did OpenSMTPD get started, and why?
I was hosting many organizations, non-profit organizations, and someone asked me to do something with the mail server. And when he asked me to do this, it seemed very simple. So I jumped into the configuration, and while doing it, I could not be sure that what I had done was right, and that I did not break something else. So I just took a break, and while discussing with a friend, we just went to a hacking session together, and I just started it and just thought, we'll see where it goes. And by the end of the day, I had something that did not work, that was not an SMTP server, that was just enough to accept some correct SMTP transaction and delivering the mail to my mailbox. So I thought, maybe I should take this further and see where it goes. And this is where we are 10 years later.
And so what... So it's a complete project now, but how long did it take to get from like that initial concept to a complete project?
It depends what you mean by complete. A year after I started, it was imported in OpenBSD, but it was working, but there were many corner cases of the RFC that was not correct, and there were many features like authentication or such, like mail dears, which is a way of delivering mail to mail directories instead of one file. These were not done. We had just the very basic SMTP server a year later, and it took 2 years to be confident that it should be that it should replace SendMail as the default SMTP implementation in OpenBSD. So yeah, 3 to 4 years. Yeah.
So what's the trickiest part of implementing SMTP daemon?
So it's there are two very tricky parts, which are both based on our philosophy. So maybe they are shared by other implementations, but not by all. The first one is the security design that we have in OpenBSD daemons, which is mostly privilege separation. So we have a daemon, instead of being a monolithic piece of software, it's split into multiple components, and each component can run with different privileges and service some requests. So for instance, you have SMTPD that's listening to the network, so it's accepting connections from untrusted hosts, and you want to authenticate some of them, but authentication requires some kind of privilege. So there's two philosophies: either you put the entire daemon with privileges to deal with this, or you do some IPC tricks to have messages passed from one process to another, and this is what we do. So this was tricky, not because the design is tricky, but you have to find out how you're going to split the daemon. And with OpenSMTPD, this took years because we had a design which worked. Then as we progress, we realized that some part can be simplified, so we start redispatching the request differently. So we start splitting the daemon differently and reorganizing as we learn from real world usage. So this is the first part, and the second part is we had a strong criteria that we should not lose mail when it enters the queue. So for some implementation, they assume that the queue is a queue is where the mail lands before it's dispatched to mailbox or relayed. So this part is assumed by many to be a really transient component. So the mail will enter and go away right after being pushed to the queue. But in reality, what I observed was that sometimes you can have mail that sits in the queue for many time. So you have to make this part really, really robust. So every operation to put a mail in the queue, remove a mail from the queue, has to be properly designed to be atomic, and to ensure that if the mail server crashes at the wrong time, you don't end up losing something. So this was really tricky because you have to really think about all the sequence of commands and where do you acknowledge things and what happens if you shut down the daemon in between two operations. But it's a really interesting problem.
What kind of philosophy differences do you have between port 25 and port 587?
Port 25 is really what listens to unauthenticated connections. So basically anyone can do anything with it and send you any kind of chaotic content. Port 587 is really submission. So this is where you authenticate your users. So you have some kind of trust in them, and it's not mail that you submit over this port is not going to land in a mailbox unless the person has authenticated. Port 25 is really the endpoint for everyone to write to you.
And so one of the problems that's happened with email over the years is this incredible increase in spam. Has OpenSMTPD been able to address some of that somehow?
Not really, because the goal of SMTPD is not really to deal with spam. We want to allow interaction with tools that are specialized in it. So, for instance, there's the rSpamD project, which does a lot of spam detections through many means, and this requires a lot of research and work that does not fit in a simple SMTP project. So, what we did was make it possible to easily plug to such tools. But there's nothing that the SMTP protocol does to prevent this. So you can do some TLS. This cuts a bit of spam if you prevent TLS. You can put some rules that you won't accept mail from hosts that don't have a reverse DNS or forward confirmed RDNS. But this is not really the SMTP server that does this. It's all the surrounding.
You mean the OpenBSD guys believe in the Unix way, and they wrote a mail server that just does SMTP?
Exactly. On OpenBSD, there's a spam daemon, which is basically gray listing. So this is a really separate daemon, which is completely unrelated from OpenSMTPD. But what you have on OpenBSD with that daemon is similar to what you can have with rSpamD doing gray listing or or I don't know, other solutions that do gray listing. But in OpenBSD, these are two separate projects. They can kind of cooperate, but basically the gray listing daemon in OpenBSD can work with postfix and sendmail. It goes up front, so really separated.
Yeah, when you were talking about having emails in the queue for a long time, I couldn't help but thinking of the bug that was in XM, which is one of the other SMTP servers, where, let's see, how did it go? You sent an email to it, and in the reply to email field, you had in brackets a command, and you forced the server to hang on to the email for 7 days. And after 7 days, once it processes and tries to send it back, it accidentally runs whatever command you have in the brackets. It's a hilarious and, of course, dangerous bug. What sorts of things are in OpenSMTPD that prevent that kind of bug, that kind of vulnerability?
Well, I think I did not look very deeply into the XM bug, but I think it allowed privilege escalation. I'm not sure, but I thought it did this. And in OpenSMTPD, what we try to do is really mitigate the issues, because we know that there are going to be bugs, and we can't prevent bugs from happening. We can try to be as careful as we can, but eventually you're going to miss something because you're just a human. But so the goal is not to prevent bugs from happening, even though you're trying to anyways, but it's to make sure that even if such bugs happen, the result is not catastrophic. So to deal with this, we have the privilege separation, where most of the daemon runs unprivileged and in a shrouded directory. And we have really a sequence of commands that leads to dangerous stuff not being done in a dangerous process. So for instance, we had, there's something called the forward files that you can put in your home directory to redirect mail outside. This has some variables expansion, so it's kind of tricky, because it means that you have this string which expands to something that's out of the OpenSMTPD control. It comes from the envelope that was submitted. So this thing is really dangerous, and it was done in a process very near to the queue a few years ago, and we started rearranging the code to move it the further down the road, so it ends up in a process that's owned by the recipient user. So the damage done is really done to the person that made the mistake, and this is like the kind of thing we do. We try to really take the dangerous part and put them in places that they are not so dangerous. So many people think of security as denial of service, and privilege escalation is the same thing. It's a security issue. We don't think of this like this. What we think is, if you have something that crashes the server, it's a nuisance, it's annoying, and you have to patch it. But it's not going to be the same as not knowing if someone has become root on your server. So we prefer to make sure that anything that could be dangerous results in an immediate crash, rather than not knowing what's going to happen with it later. So these are the kind of things we do. We fail early, and we. Another example in that part is like many software, when they crash a child process, they're going to restart it. And we don't do this kind of thing because we know it's going to allow many attempts to the remote attacker. So we're going to allow crashing. It's crashed. We're not going to be happy about this, but we're going to fix it so it does not crash again. But we know that there's not been many attempts or many, the bug will not have spilled anywhere outside the crash. I don't know if it's clear, but it's clear in my head. So.
Sure, that makes sense. We do have a chat room, of course, that listens in live, and we have a question from Aspire. Wants to know, is SMTP dying out and being replaced by anything else in the future? And then he has a follow-up question to that, but I'll let you answer that one first. Is SMTP dying?
I've heard this over 10 years ago, and we're still here, and there's still SMTP everywhere. Yesterday, someone asked me if I could fix a bug about a printer using SMTP to do whatever. I don't know what it was doing, but you have SMTP in printers, you have SMTP in every social networks to contact you, you have SMTP in companies. It's not dying. It's too big to fail. It's not perfect. It's far from perfect, and there's many things that you would like to change, but it's not going anywhere soon.
And then the second half to that question is, how many are using OpenSMTPD compared to other implementations? Do you have an idea of that?
I was wondering about this because I thought maybe you'd ask me the question. I have no idea. It's shipped in every OpenBSD install, so I don't have downloads on my website because it's shipped in many package repositories, so they're not contacting me directly. It's shipped in every OpenBSD system, and many, I don't know. I have no idea, but it's a stressful enough project because when you crash, people are really mad because they lose mail. So not knowing how many people are using it is kind of a feature to me.
So if a fledgling security researcher out there that has more time than I do wants to do this, you can go grab somebody's tools, like I think Robert Graham is one of the guys that does it, scrape the internet and try to find out how many OpenSMTPD servers there are out there and let us know.
Well, don't let me know.
Yeah. Gilles doesn't want to know. So in looking through, I think it was a presentation that you did a year or two ago. There was a function that you guys use a lot in your code, the pledge function. What is that? And what does it have to do with security? Okay,
pledge is an OpenBSD innovation. What it does is restrict a process to a subset of the system calls. So you can see it as a security feature because when the process is going to be compromised and remote code execution is going to be allowed on this process, what the process can do is that remote code execution is very limited. And any any system call it does that's not in the whitelist is going to get the process killed. And with the process killed, the daemon gets killed too. So as soon as you have some kind of fishy situation, everything gets aborted. The admin cannot not see what happened. But in my sense, it's more of a quality function because it lets you properly design what the process is supposed to do and make sure that you're not outpassing the initial contract. So it's very nice in terms of security because I'd rather have my daemon crash than execute some code that's been passed as a payload. But it's very nice for me as a developer because many times I saw a bit of code that needed refactoring and maybe that process was doing something that should have been done by another because on the contract of what the process was allowed to do with system calls, it would do something that was not planned, that I did not plan for. So it's there's two sides to pledge, but I really enjoyed that system call, and it's a shame that we can have it anywhere. So on the portable version, the pledge call is a stub. I mean it's commented out, it's defined out. So the portable branch still benefits from it because obviously we hit the bugs on OpenBSD due to pledge, and we fixed them, and it's fixed for the portable version. But on OpenBSD, it serves both as the security and quality mechanism. On portable branch, it only serves as the quality mechanism.
It kind of reminds me of in Linux there is the of course I knew it before I tried to talk about it. SE Linux and AppArmor are the kind of the two systems that do similar things. Does it share kind of a similar space to those two? And you talk about not being able to use it portably. Would there be any way to kind of build out that stub and tell it, hey, make these calls into SE Linux or AppArmor instead?
I'm not too familiar with well, I'm familiar with SE Linux because I had it at work, but I'm not familiar with how you implement any subset of pledge with this. But the philosophy seems very different to me because pledge is not really it's not flexible with regard to what you're going to whitelist. It's really setting a class of system calls that are going to be used together. So usually used together, and it's meant to be used in a very specific way where you have a program that will do an initialization of everything it needs to run, then it will enter the event loop. And the pledge goes right before the event loop to really restrict what's going to happen after. But you're not whitelisting every system call. You're really saying that this process is going to be doing only CPU, or is going to be doing network, or passing file descriptors over sockets, and it's more telling you what the process will do than how it will do it. I don't know if it's
sorry, go ahead.
I don't know if it's clear with regard to the SE Linux or AppArmor question, because I really don't know how they work. So
that's all right.
I think that was a close enough answer. But can't let Jonathan have all the fun, so I'm going to take back the big mic for a little bit for a second here. But before we do that, we do have an important message, because this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Command Line Heroes, the original podcast from Red Hat. COBOL laid the foundation for our IT infrastructure in the 60s. 50 years later, few developers are proficient in the language, but it's still used, among other places, in over 95% of the ATM transactions. Instead, more developers are learning Go, the language of the cloud. Command Line Heroes is back for its third season, and it's all about programming languages. From C to JavaScript to Ruby to Python, the podcast dives into the origin stories of some of the most prominent languages around. Episode 5 inspects the foundations of our digital infrastructure. We learn how COBOL became such an important language from the early days of mainframe computing. Fast forward to today. We're maintaining billions of lines of this legacy code, and we're also building new infrastructures for the cloud and languages like Go. But are we just creating another immovable foundation? In a few decades, will Go become the new COBOL? Command Line Heroes, an original podcast from Red Hat, is all about the people who transform tech from the command line up. To listen and subscribe, head over to the podcast platform of your choice, or visit redhat.com/heroes. That's redhat.com/HEROES. There you'll find full episodes as well as bonus content, and you can even test your skills on the Command Line Bash arcade game. That's redhat.com/heroes. And we thank Red Hat for their support of Floss Weekly. And I've just listened to the past two episodes, the previous one on COBOL and the one on before that on Perl. Wonderful episodes. Definitely check those out. And we thank their support of Floss Weekly. So let's go ahead and come back, and I have a couple of questions to ask. And now it's completely blanking in my head. Oh, yes. I wanted to talk about spam fighting. I was praised. I've been on, I don't know exactly how I got on this mailing list, but there was a list of basically the sort of the core people who are doing spam fighting at all the various organizations. And one of the ways I came up with in fighting spam, at least on my site, was to use a high MX trap. Basically, I have a second port where the MX is set really, really high, but apparently the spammers love to deliver to that address because they figure it'll be fewer testings for that. Have you ever heard of the high MX trap and the strategy for that?
I've heard of many strategies, but I'm not sure I understood this one. So they set up an MX with a very high priority.
Right.
So it ends, when you mean high priority, you mean with a really high priority value, which makes it the last MX to be called, right?
Yeah, it would be normally, but what happens is the spammers love to go to the machine that's least likely to be configured with the proper security. And so I set this up, and it attracted like 90% of the spammers, which was really wonderful. And I got praised on this the mailing list. This is the internal mailing list for like all the people like AOL and Earthlink and all those other places. It was like they were like, that's a cool idea and it works. So I was pretty happy with that.
Yeah, the spammers assume that you're not going to put as much effort into securing the backup MX, the secondary MXs. So they tend to try to reach this one first. A common trick is to check on the secondary MX if the host attempted to connect to the first one first. And to ensure that if it bypassed the first MX, it provides a penalty on it. But I don't think these are real. I mean, they're efficient on one time, but there are so many different implementations that when you try to fight spam using tricks like this low-level DNS order of MX, and you're going to have side effects to me. I would have to put an experiment to be 100% sure, but to me, intuitively, it's going to have side effects because I know for a fact that not all MTAs are using the same algorithms to look up the MXs. They're not having the same retry strategies, and some may think that for real the last MX should be used because they have fallback somehow. So I'm not very happy with I'm not really happy with using tricks like this. I prefer to have like really upfront strategies where you have two MX, the primary, the secondary. You install both MXs with the same security mechanism to ensure that spammers are annoyed, and you share the data between both. But it's more work, but to me it's less dangerous with regard to losing real mail.
Right. And so in the old days, it was all ASCII. And now we've got these combinations of UTF-8, UTF-16. What's been the most complex thing in introducing non-ASCII transmission to things like SMTP?
Well, really not tricky because we did not do it. There are two parts really. There's a confusion between what's in the SMTP protocol itself and what's in the data section of the SMTP protocol. What's in the protocol itself does not have so much UTF-8. It's only in the email addresses when you're dealing with countries that don't fit in the ASCII table. But this is a new problem. These are issues that have not reached me before last year or a couple of years ago. People did not have this issue before. It's starting to spread because we are starting to see domains that have what I call weird characters in it. But most of the traffic until a few years ago was you had the SMTP part plain ASCII with domains that are plain ASCII, and you had the data part of the message which contained the UTF-8 bits. But this is not handled by the SMTP server. This is handled by the client. So this was really easy for us. We just had to allow characters to not be truncated to 7 bits and let them pass. And we did not have anything to do with this. So this was really easy for us. Now that we're starting to get people asking, oh, will you support this character? Because in my country it's used, we have to start investigating what it means for us to deal with this. I suspect that it's going to be painful, but I have not yet digged in enough to know what it involves.
The other thing I'm seeing is a lot more MIME coming through. And in particular, people sending text HTML forks only, rather than having both the text plain and a text HTML fork. Are you seeing more of that as well?
Oh yes, this is the link and image generation of mail. So the fact that everyone, I feel it's dangerous that we let this happen so easily. And we should enforce that. We should collectively, as mail operators, enforce that this should not be the bulk of messages. Because when you make this the default, that you can include links and images and everything, it becomes the norm for regular users to use clients that do this. And this has all the side effects that you can imagine for spammers to abuse the message and construct messages that are hard to spot for someone not savvy. But there's this part that we can't really interfere into this. So either you're too strict and you disallow stuff like this, and I know people who can reject mail that contains HTML part because they think they operate a mail server that's purely technical, so nothing non-text will be allowed to pass. But this is like really extreme, and you can't push that on everyone. So we have to find ways that are outside the SMTP to deal with this. We have to make better tools because not everyone can spot the tricky parts. It's easy to pretend to be someone else on email. You can pretend to send mail from an address, and unless everyone validates that indeed that machine is allowed to send on behalf of that domain, most people get tricked, and many people are still amazed that you can do this. But it was like the first thing you learned in SMTP 10 years ago, and it's still the reality today. All
Right.
the SPF, DKM, these are not implemented by everyone. These are not enforced by everyone, mostly. And this is what allows many tricks to happen over HTML.
I'm hoping someday that HTML or that text plain comes back into fashion. That's all I'm hoping.
Yeah, I'm hoping too, but I don't have really good hopes for this. I think it's going to go worse, but yeah.
So what's the developments? Sorry, go ahead.
So I was going to say a good strategy is to have two email addresses, because what happens is that if you block HTML emails, you're going to find out the hard way, at least in my country, that some of the governmental agencies that you have to receive mail from, like taxes, are going to send you mails that will not have that plain text part. And if you're blocking this, you're blocking mail that's going to hit you hard the day after. So it's good for a mail. What I do myself, I have two email addresses. I have one which is outside of my server and which is used for all this stuff. So I know that the mail that goes into it is really not quality, but I don't have to enforce anything. And I have my own machine which holds my own mail, which is more strict because I know it's going to take mail from the open source community, from close people, and that it's not expected to receive mail that's really bad. But I know that if I was too strict, I might miss some mails that are related to, I don't know, insurance, taxes, or stuff like this, because they are not educated to do mailing the proper way. So
yeah, it's like anybody who started thinking HTML was the right thing to ship in a mail message. Just I don't know where that came from. Anyway, I could rant on that for another hour and a half. I do want to talk a little bit more about the project, though. So you're on the project. Who else are you working with, and how do you coordinate stuff?
So I'm the founder of the project and main developer. So I'm the one who's mostly working all the time. There's Eric Foro, which is a friend of mine who joined the project about 7 years ago, and he's also very, very involved. Then there's Sunil Nimagada, which is one of our developers from India, who's coming here. He's coming, develops some stuff from a long time, goes away for a long time, then comes back. So he's very active, but not as much as us. There's Jorg Jung, which is an OpenBSD developer who also does some work with us. And then there's all the OpenBSD developers that come and go. They have they work on a feature, they commit it to the project with our peer review, then they go and maybe they commit something else a year later. So there's like this core team of 2 people, extended to 5, and all the others that join eventually. And what happened with OpenSMTPD is that it's an OpenBSD project. So the main tree for development is OpenBSD. So sometimes when you have like these huge sweeps of fixes happening to many daemons or bottom layer, like we have a library called iMessage for IPC. All daemons use that library. They will make sure that OpenSMTPD benefits from it. So even if they're not contributing regularly to the project, they're still going to make sure the diff is properly applied to all daemons, which include OpenSMTPD. So there's like many people contributing, but not on a regular basis.
Cool. And so do you ever get contributions from the outside?
We used to a lot. We used to, at some point, we were getting more contributions from the Linux crowd and the FreeBSD crowd than from OpenBSD, simply because there's many, many more users out there. But a few years ago, we had I hope you recall the hard build issue with OpenSSL. And this led to LibreSSL, which was forked from there. And ever since then, we had some really tricky portable version where some distributions were lagging behind because they could not adapt LibreSSL to the distribution. And we had some distribution using LibreSSL, but old version of OpenSMTPD because they were lagging behind. And all this fragmentation has led to less contribution from outside. But we have dealt with the issue, so the next release is going to be really portable as before. So every distro can adapt it, and I hope we get more contribution when this is released.
You've dealt with the issue, so is OpenSMTPD going to support LibreSSL and OpenSSL?
Yeah. It's going to support both. The next release that's going to happen in late October is going to support both. Our target is LibreSSL, clearly, because we don't have the manpower to support more. And OpenBSD ships with LibreSSL, so this is where we test and build. And what happens, to clarify how we work, we build on OpenBSD and we make sure OpenBSD works. The code that's used on portable is the same code. We just have a small layer of ifdefs and stuff to make sure it builds outside. So it can take a lot of time for us to spot that something has been broken outside of LibreSSL. So for this release, we made sure that they both work, and we managed to reduce the delta between both so much that it's manageable, because that was not the case before. And so the next release is going to open up contribution, hopefully, and we'll see from there. But back then, more contribution come from Linux, and I really enjoyed this.
Mm-hmm. Is this something you do professionally? Is there funding for this project, and do you two do it professionally, or is it just kind of a labor of love for you guys?
No, I started the project. I was not at all working in the mail industry. A few years ago, I got sponsored for 2 years to work full time on the project, and it was really great because we could move really fast on many topics at the same time. This funding I had stopped because a long story, but it's in the presentation that's online. It's a decision we took ourselves not to compromise the project, and since then it's not funded. It's a hobby thing. But what I did a few months ago was to switch to a part-time job. So I would have a quarter of my time dedicated to the project. So it's in between. I mean, if I get funded if some company needs a feature and wants to sponsor me into writing it, if it makes sense to have it in the project, I will do it. And yeah.
Have you looked at? I know some guys are moving towards the model where they use Patreon, or of course there's other alternatives to Patreon, but that seems to be the one I hear the most. Have you guys looked at that? Is that something that's on the table?
I moved to it 3 months ago. I was not familiar with it much, so I'm still trying to figure out how it works. But yeah, that would be a way. What I proposed to people was to fund me on Patreon, and I would provide like early access to some of my code that's going to be published maybe 2 months later, or maybe access to documentation, or it's not really clarified right now what they're going to gain from this. But yeah, it's a possibility for me. If enough people would fund me on Patreon, I would likely spend more time working on this.
And then has OpenSMTPD ever been audited, and what were the results from that?
Yeah, a few years ago, I asked, a friend of me who worked at a security company asked me if I was okay with him doing an audit, and I was like thrilled because any eyeball looking at my code that's outside to the project is going to spot things that I may read 10 times without spotting the issue. And they spent several months working on it on and off, and they released a pretty impressive audit that led to many advisories, which is a nice way to find out that the mitigation mechanisms are efficient, because there were no privilege escalation on the OpenBSD version, so it was really annoying because they found many things. But that's the life of a project. But many of the issues would have been catastrophic if it weren't for the security mechanism in OpenBSD and the design of the daemon preventing an issue from leading to the catastrophe. So you would have something that could have led to remote code execution that would eventually lead to a crash of the server, which is annoying but less scary. And it was nice because they really did an awesome work, and it was some of the issues they raised, it took 3 readings to make sure that, oh, yeah, that can actually happen. It's really twisted, but yeah, it's an issue.
Wow.
And having people skilled like that look at the code and fix the issue ensures that, well, I prefer that they find it in an audit that it's found in the wild.
Yes.
Well, it's hopefully found by somebody staring at the code, not by somebody in the wild who then takes advantage of it, and then you get blasted all over the pages of Wired saying, okay, this thing is broken. It's probably a good thing to do that way. Hey, we're almost out of time. Eric Duckman wants to know when you're going to add blockchain to OpenSMTPD.
I don't know. I'll think about it, but.
This is a constant question. It's actually become a kind of a running joke where every week we talk about some sort of level of blockchain somehow, and it's just a joke. So don't worry about that.
I'm sure I will have funding if I implement blockchain in the demo. That may be an idea.
It's really our way to troll our guests.
Right. It's also part of a. As we say, it's a drinking game. So as soon as we mention blockchain, somebody takes a drink. So whoever's out there doing that now, go ahead. It's your turn. 3 more questions, actually. One is there anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure we cover before we have to let you go?
No, not really. Well, there's lots of things to cover, but I think it will go too technical and take one more hour to discuss them. So.
And what's your favorite scripting language?
I love Python, but I started using Go a few weeks ago, a few weeks ago, and I'm still in the love-hate phase.
What's your favorite text editor? Yeah, sorry, cut out. What's your favorite text editor?
I switch. I'm going to avoid the holy war. I switch between VI and Emacs depending on what I do. When it's administrative tasks and editing configuration files, it's VI, and when it's coding, I use Emacs.
Nice. Well, there we go. Somebody who's bilingual. That's always handy. All right. Good deal. Hey, it's been great having you on the show talking about OpenSMTPD. Again, thanks for stepping up at the very last second to fill this slot. I appreciate that as well. And I've learned a lot about SMTP and SMTPD and OpenBSD project and you. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. That was our guest, Gilles. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, what do you think there, Jonathan? Jonathan, I can get.
Gilles Chehade, I believe is his name.
There you go.
Yes. Email. It's still with us. And boy, it's nice to have alternatives. It's nice to have more than one project out there. They've got some really interesting ideas as far as security. I really like that idea of their pledge for each application. I don't remember if it was per application or per routine, but the idea that this is only ever going to call these system calls, and if we ever call anything else, something is bad wrong. I mean, that's just a neat idea.
Yeah, it is. It's great.
It's similar to some of the things that I know SE Linux does, but it sounds like it's implemented in a very different way. But still, it's cool. And some of the other things that they've done, it sounds like it's a really neat project. I was doing some looking, trying to figure out, if there's any statistics on how many people are using it, and I can't find anything. Either nobody in the entire world is using it, or somehow they're falling through the cracks, on the different places that are trying to track this stuff.
Or they're using it without declaring it. I mean, that's possible too.
It is. The website I found kind of looked like it was let's scrape these 200,000 mail daemons that we found and try to figure out what exactly each one is running, and it didn't show up in that list. So I don't know. But regardless of all of that, the OpenBSD guys are great. They kind of fill a great niche. And it's really neat to listen to learn about this mail server that is very OpenBSD-esque.
Yes, definitely. I mean, OpenBSD for one. I mean, I remember running it on the servers that I was managing, and the thing I was always impressed with was Theo's commitment to secure above all else, and just the gear of that. The downside of that, of course, is that it doesn't end up in OpenBSD until it's vetted. And one of the things I found when I moved from OpenBSD to FreeBSD was that now I had access to a lot more things, and that was the important side of that. So that was it. Plus, it also had ZFS and a big ports package and a bunch of other stuff. So and it could run Linux binaries. So that was kind of nice. And OpenBSD didn't have any of those facilities at that point. But you know, I appreciate that about Theo. I met him once at a conference. I think it was in Brazil somewhere. And it was he was having an argument with somebody about how the other BSDs weren't as secure, and it was like, I understand where you're coming from. You know, you want your BSD to be secure, then you're going to run Theo's OpenBSD.
Yeah,
so,
it's had all. There at one time they had on their website, I think it was OpenBSD, had on their website, it's like, we've only ever had, it was something like 2 RCE bugs. And it was just,
right.
You know, that was their thing. And boy, that was impressive.
And they introduced things like, stack randomization and, linker order changing, things like that. It was just a bunch of stuff that everybody else eventually adopted. So glad that he was out there being on the bleeding edge for all that stuff. Anyway, so speaking of bleeding edge, let's talk about who's coming up. Boy, is that a nice transition. Next week, So you two, you and Dan talked with Sawyer, Sawyer X, or whatever his name actually is. I have no idea what his name is. Sawyer, and he talked about how he was the current pumpkin for Perl and should come back on the show eventually. And we got him on next week. So he's going to be coming on next week talking about Perl, talking about the state of the world about Perl. So basically doing I'm going to call it a... what do they call it? They call it State of the Onion for at a conference, but it's sort of like the state of the pumpkin. He's going to talk about the releases of Perl, how it's current and lively and still being developed, and what the strategies are. It's going to be great. So he's coming on next week to do that. Right after that, we've got PyPy Security, which is the Python equivalent of the CPAN. We can talk about how the security works for that. Just added to the schedule, it's Dan and who else is it? Dan and Simon are going to be talking about OggCamp. They're going to talk about what that's all about and make that work. So that'll be fun. So that's all I have on the schedule right now. So that means I've got to send out some emails this weekend because we have to fill some slots. That's my job as the showrunner to make sure that all gets taken care of. We have if you have any other suggestions, twit.tv/floss is the homepage for the show. Again, if you have any other suggestions, please tell the project leader or the community coordinator to email me, especially if it's not blockchain. But we'll take blockchain. We'll take anything on this show. We have a live stream at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays at live.twit.tv. We took a number of questions from there, at least 2 or 3, I think, this time. You can follow us at Floss Weekly on Twitter. You can follow me at Merlin, MERLYN on Twitter. I am going to be in 2 weeks for Labor Day weekend down in Atlanta. So if you're at DragonCon, the big giant 70,000 attendee show, please come up and say hi. If you see me, I'll be running around as much as I can. I'm going to be giving my talk on Flutter. It's not going to be the same talk I pitched. It's going to be just a talk on sort of generically what Flutter's all about. And I'm going to be demonstrating, though, I will be demonstrating running something on both a simulated browser and the web. So those are the only 2 mechanisms that work. Can't get the desktop working yet. There's something weird with that. I'm going to be at All Things Open in Raleigh, North Carolina in mid-October. I'm just going down as press. I don't have any speeches to give. However, if you go to allthingsopen.org and you enter Floss Weekly, all lowercase, you will get the cheapest possible price for attending that conference. It's already a cheap conference, but hey, they're giving us a discount as well, right up to registration day, right up to the final day. So please go ahead and check that out. Raleigh, North Carolina is a wonderful place to be in mid-October, so that's not a bad place. Jonathan, anything you want to plug?
I will give you an assignment, Randall. By next week, you need to have a hard line installed there at the house.
Yes, I know. It's pretty bad this time. I know. Sorry.
Hopefully after the editors work their magic, you won't be able to tell. But oh my word, during the live show, it was bad.
Well, I'll send up my hard copy or my double ender, so at least you'll have the audio from everything that dropped out.
Yes. If I was a little closer to you, I'd come pull the cable myself for you. But anyways,
well, the cable's actually, I got to say, the cable's like actually right through this wall. There's an office right there, and I imagine I probably could have just borrowed it and pulled it in.
All right, I will mention that you can follow me on Twitter at JP_Bennett. Feel free to check out. I occasionally post about security things. And send me your security stories, because over at hackaday.com, I write up every Friday the This Week in Security roundup of what's been the big security news, things you need to know about for the week. And feel free to check that out as well. Randall, it was great to be here. Great to be here with you once again.
Jonathan, thanks for like the fourth in a row. Was it right?
Yes,
fourth in a row?
Yes, I believe so. I think so.
Well, you're just so available, Hopefully we get somebody else for next week. So hopefully you can take a break at least at some point here. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining me as my co-host, and we'll see you all again next week on FLOSS Weekly.